So good to see everybody. Thank you so much for taking your Sunday evening. Oh my goodness, what a weekend. So much going on. We know how busy you have been, from athletic events to anybody here run the Blue Jean race? That was really impressive. Great job. And mental health awareness, really, really cool. Just want to let you know, we saw you. And yeah, great. The plays, we've got so much going on with the athletics, football team, great win on Friday, and so much. And so I say this as a way of acknowledgement of all that you're doing and the fact that you have chosen to be here tonight with all of that going on right before the start of a new week. Means a lot to us, and we are thrilled to be able to put on a program that is of value to you, to take time out of your schedule to come and be with us tonight. We are so thrilled to welcome Dr. Pandit with us tonight. She is coming back to Kinkaid as an alum, graduated from here not too long ago, and continues to have ties with Kinkaid. Her 3 children have attended Kinkaid. 2 have graduated. Suraj in 2021 and Sanjana last year. And Sanvi, we salute you in 8th grade and coming into the high school next year. It's also a pleasure to have Dr. Pandit's parents with us tonight. We want to recognize you and thank you for coming and joining us this evening. Dr. Pandit is also married to an esteemed doctor, Dr. Rahul Pandit, who is one of the the most notable eye surgeons in the country, researcher on the Weill Cornell Medical School faculty in New York. And so we have a medical powerhouse team, and it's such a pleasure to be talking about leadership in healthcare, in medicine, and in medical research tonight with one of the foremost practitioners here in the Houston area and in the United States. And you've read Dr. Pandit's bio, her educational background from Kinkaid, her going to Baylor Medical College, and working at Baylor Medical College now, having gone to University of Texas Southwestern Medical School for medical school, and coming back to Houston for her professional practice, and focusing in on specifically working with the Veterans Administration. And so just wanted to make a little note here for our discussion tonight. Dr. Pandit's the second person that we've had in our leadership speaker series who works for the federal government. Last year, seniors will recall that we had Casey Cowan in, our Navy SEAL, working for the government. Dr. Pandit, different government employee experience, but nonetheless, it's something to think about. Think about the professional opportunities that come from in government service, and so that'll be something that we'll look to explore a little bit tonight as well. So with that, we are so grateful to have you here, and we'd like to give a warm Kinkaid welcome. So one other procedural note, hopefully everybody signed in. Absolutely critical that you sign in to get credit, and so just make sure that you are signed in for the evening. So we'll go from there. Delightful to have you with us.
Oh my goodness, thank you for that introduction. And if I can't project properly, please just raise your hand. I'm going to work on that though. But thank you for that introduction. I'm thrilled to be back.
My pleasure, and thank you for the questions that you provided in the registration form. I organized those by topic. We have been looking at them, shared them with Dr. Pandit, and we have been thinking about what would be of most interest to you. Maybe we can just start out with, we had a lot of questions about your life story and how you got from Kinkaid to where you are today, and especially thinking about the hindsight. Here we are, juniors and seniors. What should we be thinking about? Maybe we actually stop here and ask, how many of you are thinking career in healthcare, medicine, administration? So we've got a few that are thinking, and so thinking about, okay, what should I be doing to prepare for college here, Kinkaid? What should I be thinking about when I get to college and beyond?
So that was a great question in general, thinking about what you should be preparing for now in terms of your future career. But it's also an almost impossible question, right?
Right.
Because that life journey evolves. And for me, I'll be very straight with you, I didn't plan too much ahead. I did know that I wanted to be a physician. I did know I was following in my father's footsteps, and I really admired what he did. I admired other physicians that I had seen what they do, but I didn't know what that would look like. For me, medicine was a very straightforward path that had only, the singular appearance of a certain way to practice it, my own doctor, my pediatrician. I didn't really know of anything else. So I entered undergraduate knowing that I sort of liked science. Physics was really hard. I was better at biology. I was pretty decent at writing. Kinkaid prepares you with writing. So keep working on the writing, it'll come back. But then when I entered undergraduate, I really liked non-science classes. I liked English, I liked philosophy. And so when I went into college, I had the goal, frankly, of enjoying other classes and getting what I think was referred to as a liberal arts education. I really wanted to continue what I'd started at Kinkaid, which is that holistic education, and I continued that. But in the back of my head, because I still had this thought of maybe being a physician, you have to satisfy certain core requirements. The good news now, I think, for a lot of people of this generation going into medicine is you don't go straight through. In fact, you're encouraged to not go straight through, meaning you don't do 4 years of undergraduate and then 4 years of medical school and then 7 years of training. It's a decade plus of dedication to the healthcare field, and it's actually encouraged that you take a break. What you do on that break may vary, but you do things to discover who you are. Have some self-awareness and self-growth. That makes you a better physician, frankly. And so I didn't know that then, but I took a lot of self-reflective breaks during my training, meaning I didn't know I was going to be a scientist until pretty late in the game. I was going along the path of being a physician. I applied to medical school in undergraduate. I luckily got in. I came back home. I wanted to be close to my family, but not too close. And then, I got married to my college sweetheart, so moved to Iowa. So I didn't plan a lot. I kind of let life lead me where it was meant to lead me. I didn't want to be separated as a newlywed, so I joined him in Iowa. I married a Midwesterner, and I had to kind of figure that out while doing my training. And then we figured out kids, and then we said, well, it'd be nice to be near family. So then we found our way back to Houston, and then 22 years later, we're still here. So we didn't plan that. We took each episode of life, and I certainly did, as an opportunity. And the people that I met along that journey shaped me. That's not to say that I didn't have a background of purpose to serve, to help, and I think that's what led me to where I am today. I had a purpose in mind, but I didn't have a checklist. Like, I have to do this, I have to get into med school, I have to get the best residency, I have to get this fellowship at this institution. I didn't have a checklist. I quit a few things along the way that were not working. it didn't fulfill a purpose in my life. It didn't make me happy. It seemed to make the people I cared around me unhappy. So I guess my only advice, as a high schooler was thinking, I kind of knew what I liked to do and I knew what I was good at, but I had a general purpose in the back of my head always. And the people who knew me and cared about me reminded me of that purpose. So it's fine to ignore people for a while, but they come back to you in little messages. So
that's great.
Yeah, that's my life story,
Great.
I guess. I mean, I'm still doing it. We'll see.
Yeah, we had several questions that you asked. Veterans, you end up with veterans.
Yeah.
And there was one student asked, do you have ties to veteran community in your family? How did that happen?
That's a very insightful question. So my husband's family and my father served in the military in India. So I think we've always had a lot of respect for serving your country. And then I came here, and my family came here as immigrants. So we're very patriotic Americans because we took that very seriously when we became citizens. And so the idea of taking care of people who've served their country, yes, it is ingrained in me and in my family. I married somebody whose family has served. But then beyond that, there's an idea called equity, which some of you may be aware of. It's the idea that we all have equal access to the same opportunities. And veterans who've served this country do not often have equitable access to quality health care. We have one of the best healthcare systems in the world. It's got its problems, but it's one of the best. And our veterans don't have access to that. And so many, many years ago, the United States government, and pardon me for talking about the history of it, but I know you won't mind, but this is
good for us to know.
This is a really interesting thing about the Veterans Health Administration. The connection between the VA, Veterans Affairs, and the Healthcare Administration with institutions of medical education, higher institutions, so whether it's a Mayo Clinic or a Harvard or a Baylor or a Stanford or a UC Davis, those programs were encouraged to affiliate with a veterans healthcare facility so that you can then have an institutional access of research, education, and healthcare provided to our veterans. So it's a service-oriented transactional type relationship where the higher elite institutions of education can then offer services for our United States veterans, while at the same time providing training during residency and medical school and fellowship and beyond, and faculty. So for example, at the Michael DeBakey VA here in Houston, that was one of the first institutions in the country and the first one in the Texas Medical Center, our VA, to perform a non-invasive aortic valve replacement surgery. Not St. Luke's, not Texas Heart Institute, the VA, because those Baylor faculty members wanted to do it for our veterans. And so that history of providing top-notch care to our veterans comes from that idea to improve equitable access. It doesn't exist everywhere. We still have a long ways to go. But that history between academic institutions and the VA has gone back decades. And so for me, it was a natural process. It provided an outlet to serve. It also really provided an outlet for me as a researcher. The VA and the federal government have supported my research since 2012 continuously, and I'm very grateful for that. And it goes directly back to a population of people that are very, very sick. The veterans are among the sickest in this country. You know, you take a microcosm of chronic, any disease, diabetes. The veterans have the worst complications of diabetes, heart disease. The veterans have the worst complications of heart disease. So if you want to help a population or see impactful change, that's where you go. If you want to volunteer as a high school student, go volunteer at a VA. You know, it becomes real very quickly.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that background. It's really important for us to understand that. I want to talk more about the veterans in a couple of minutes, but maybe we go back here. and think about skills, qualities, characteristics that are of value to you in your professional life now. Things that you either started working on at Kinkaid or would go back and spend more time working on. You talked about your enjoyment for reading. You were good at writing. And here, what I wanted to explore with you were the not necessarily the hard skills of the STEM program, but the softer, the durable skills. We call them the durable skills that are so critical to the healthcare profession. And interested in getting your comments about what we can do to develop those, what those skills are that we should be focusing in on, and what we can do to develop them.
So the good news is you all are at an institution that encourages those soft skills, as it were. Writing, and I should correct you, I was not good at writing. I worked really hard at getting better at it, and it was well worth the effort, because I still use it in this day. But an important skill that I wish I had cultivated, or more of a characteristic or an observational skill, and this is gonna be clunky. I wish I had been more curious. I think, and who watches Ted Lasso in here? Okay, do you remember when Ted says, be curious, not judgmental? Do you remember that? That's everything. So I think I spent a lot of my high school judging things based on my first impression, whether it's people, sadly, or circumstances. Like, you know what, that's gonna be too hard. That's not my thing. I don't wanna really go there and expend the effort. It's not worth the effort, the benefit I get out of that. Whereas if I'd been curious, instead of making a judgment call about a person, a class, and rather getting to know somebody, even if they're completely different than me, getting to talk to a teacher in a subject that I had really no idea about. I had been curious instead of judging that. I would have gotten a lot more out of high school, and I would have been a lot more prepared when it came time for college. Because those skills of being curious, I utilize them every day of my life. I'm not even kidding. Certainly in science, you have to be curious. That's what keeps you going, because most of the time I fail. Most of the time in science is failure. But what keeps it fun is you're curious. When your patients are ill, you can't often help them right away. It's a process. But if you're curious about their life and you ask them things rather than judging what they're doing, it's a lot better relationship. When you're curious about the world around you, people who are completely different, you get a lot more satisfaction in your life that is not measured by success, right? It's not a checklist of things that I have achieved. If you're curious, it's more about the quality of the relationship. So I wish I had gone back and been more curious. And the second part of that, since I have a captive audience, is part of being curious is also accepting the weird, the outlandish, the odd about yourselves, as well as other people. And this is hard, because that's not accepted, right? It's hard to accept things that are not normally accepted. But in science, and this is where it comes to me as a scientist, it's the odd data, the weird data, that has led to my biggest success, or what we term success in science. It's those odd observations that actually lead to impactful publications and things that people want to give me money to study. Like, that's interesting. So don't ignore the weird and be curious.
That's great. That's great. Thanks. As a physician and in your positions, I'm interested in now kind of exploring for our seminar topic on leadership, the different points at which you find yourself in a leadership position working with, and I'm thinking here as I was thinking about what you're doing, obviously with a research team, in a hospital setting, part of an administration, dealing with other physicians, and would like to get your thoughts there on how to be a successful leader when leading, but also not necessarily leading, also being part of a team and in your various capacities and what you do, and your thoughts there can help us.
Well, that's a great question. Because to be an impactful leader, you don't always have to lead, really. You can lead by your own example, really. I'm learning to be a better listener to my team members and my colleagues. I find that a collaborative spirit gets you a lot further and gets all of us to the goal faster. So listening to my team members, and if I have an initiative that I feel very strongly about, that we have to start this program at the VA, this is actually what we're doing now. I really feel that the Houston VA should lead in a national way. I need to talk to people and listen to people who have expertise in that, who have worked at a government level to start a national program. It has nothing to do with cardiovascular disease, but it could be people who are used to bringing nurses on board your team, bringing pharmaceutical industry leaders on your team. I have no experience in that, so I had to talk to people who had done that. So I've learned to become a good listener, frankly. Those are some of the leadership skills that I'm still learning and developing, actually.
And we did have some questions, very interested specifically what your day looks like, what your what you do with your research team, what that looks like practically, so we get a better idea of your life.
Yeah, so I have a very different sort of life than, say, my husband, who is also an MD. So that gives you the breadth of what you can do with a healthcare degree, a professional degree of any sort. But so for me, I'm a physician scientist. And what that means is, and I'm on faculty at a College of Medicine. So my week-to-week life actually varies. I like that. So I run a pulmonary vascular disease institute, which is the Disease Institute of Cardiovascular Sciences. So we have a research team, research coordinators. I meet with them at least 2 or 3 times a week about trials, patient recruitment, any issues we're having with any of our patients if they're having side effects, regulatory issues because we have to respond to the government about our data, when is our next publication. I have a couple students that I mentor in that research capacity. I meet with them at least twice a week. But then when I'm on clinical, we call it service, clinical service, and I will do that 1 to 2 weeks at a time, I'm fully immersed in the hospital taking care of patients. And what I do is inpatient medicine. I see some patients in the clinic, but mostly I take care of patients that are hospitalized in the ICU or for other reasons but have pulmonary issues. So my week to week varies, actually, but I like it. I think my husband would really dislike that. so I like having the variety in my life and day to day and week to week. But that's what academic faculty do. If any of you do end up choosing medical school, you'll work with people like me who put teaching and research and education, really above anything, because that's our job. And we teach at the bedside. We teach you while we're taking care of our patients.
And talking about patients and talking about veterans, you've already mentioned the fact that this is, when we look demographically in terms of population that is precariously situated given health and access issues. And we know just recently during the COVID pandemic, devastating impact on the demographic. And I wanted to explore your thoughts, the leadership challenge of what could be seen as you as the leader of a small team that involves a patient, the patient's family, and they are looking to you to lead and relying on your professional expertise and ultimately with life hanging in the balance. And so we're going to have it struck me as I was collecting my thoughts that you're the first leader that we've had in that actually deals with life and death on a daily basis. And how do you prepare for that? Does medical school prepare you for that? Does simply your residency, your daily experiences is something that you assume you will understand through the practice of what it is by watching mentors deal, but then you're in that moment of dealing with a patient, dealing with family, and being looked to lead in that most challenging of situations for that small team.
That's such a thoughtful question. A few people have asked me that, including my own parents. Those closest to me watched me and other healthcare providers who were forward-facing during that pandemic. And every family, and you all remember this, you all were old enough to remember, every family has some story related to the pandemic, hopefully not tragic or losing a life, but everybody has some family story. So for my family story, it was tough at home. Their mother was not present. And then at work, I was called to lead. And that was a position that I was not expecting. But I was blown away by the grace and the bravery of the nurses that I led. We had to teach each other. This is in the very early days about putting on personal protective equipment. We didn't even know how to do that. I held the hand of a colleague as he passed away in the ICU. He was head of the infectious disease department at Baylor. There are memories from that I will never forget. Very painful. It had to, really take something of purpose. I use that word a lot, to get up in the morning and go to work, knowing that I was going to pronounce more people that day, and also lead new interns, new residents. Some of these young people had just got an MD to their name, and I guarantee you they did not go into medicine to do CPR every hour on this many people. And I don't want to be dramatic about this, but that's what it was like in the summer of 2020 for these young doctors. So there was a sense of, I need to be there for my team of nurses who I've known for 2 decades. I need to be there for my young mentees, the young doctors and trainees, because this is not what they expected. And then, most importantly, my patients. And we were not letting family members in. It was one of the biggest mistakes we made in healthcare. We didn't allow visitation. And it was a terrible decision. I mean, everybody agrees. We didn't know what we were dealing with, but that was so hard because we had to take care of our patients and then talk to their families on the phone. And you can't capture that on the phone. And these young doctors were not equipped to do that. So we were all trying to figure out a way to do this. And as a leader, I was trying to institute certain norms. And so every day after rounds, we debriefed. We talked about how everybody was feeling. That's not something we do in terms of, we talk about wellness and mindfulness. We didn't do that. I didn't do that when I was a trainee, but we started implementing that. So out of a lot of this pain came some good things. So one was, we look at wellness as an important thing in preventing burnout in medical education now. So we make this as part of our daily rounds. How's everybody doing in the ICU? We include our nurses in multidisciplinary rounds. How's everybody doing? Any issues that are coming up, any concerns about certain patients, any concerns we're not addressing. We now involve families much more. We learned a lot from the pandemic. In the ICU especially, it's not just the patients, but it's also the family members, because sometimes my patients can't talk to me. I have to say, I was privileged to go into some of this knowing that you have to serve by watching my dad take care of AIDS patients in the 80s. People didn't take care of patients with AIDS in the 80s. Some of us adults remember that, and I'm sure a lot of your parents will remember that. But watching him take care of a young man with the Kaposi sarcoma lesions, that was advanced AIDS. You don't see that as much anymore because we have good treatments for HIV now. But seeing my dad take care of a patient that way, that's what came to my mind every day when I got up and went to work, and it was hard, knowing that another person is probably gonna die. You get up and you have a bigger purpose to serve. And it wasn't just me. I mean, every one of us in the healthcare field did that. I really am just the only one who gets to speak about it today to all of you. It was one of the biggest privileges of my life to serve during the pandemic. And frankly, you know, as a researcher, I learned a lot. So I'll always take that with me, and thank you for asking me about it. I get to talk about it sometimes, but I don't always get to talk about it so freely.
Thanks for sharing freely. Right. You mentioned your father.
Yeah.
And what a powerful influence he's been on your professional life and career choice. Be interested if you could share thoughts with us about, we had several questions coming in and asking about mentors, people who have influenced you in addition to your father, how to find mentors, how to nurture a mentor-mentee relationship as a mentee, and thoughts along those lines. And relatedly, there were several questions about networking and being able to make contacts with people, finding mentors, getting in touch with people, and creating a network that can help one educationally and professionally.
Yeah, so mentorship has played a huge role in my life. I didn't appreciate it until later. So mentors can take different forms. They are oftentimes your champions. And they champion who you are at your core, okay? They are gonna champion you figuring out your own best self. So that's why a mentor doesn't have to always be a career mentor. In fact, in high school, I would encourage you to seek out people who believe in you, who see a spark in you. It could be a coach. It could be a teacher in a class that maybe you've struggled in, actually, and they've seen you through some struggles. My English teacher, junior year, Mr. Thames, again, I struggled in English, but I loved Shakespeare. I don't know, I really liked it. I loved the plays, maybe because it was like easy reading, because you were actually just reading a play, I don't know. So I stayed with him, in touch with him. And back then there was like not email and texting, right? So, you know, I kept up with him with letters, and I said what I was up to. I was very sad to hear, you know, he passed away. So, but he was a champion for my love of Shakespeare and that curiosity. I didn't appreciate it then. So those kind of people in high school who value you for that spark you have in you, they see something in you. And you have a safe space to go talk to them about that spark. Maybe nobody else knows that side of you, but you can go talk to them. Cultivate that. Cultivate that in college. In college, as you start thinking more about the classes, the seminars, those one-on-one relationships, get to know those professors that you like. Those are the scholastic mentors. That may be more in your field. They have a love of the same subject as you. They can help you develop that as a career path. What do you do with that? It may look very different than what you think. And then in your professional career, absolutely there's mentors. Frankly, I have mentors that look like me. They're women of color, because in science, there aren't too many that look like me. So that's who I gravitated to, because I didn't know this path. And so those are the people that helped me, particularly since I have 3 children, I was trying to balance, you know, my male colleagues understood it, but, you know, I was always behind, seemingly, because I couldn't get publications out because I was pregnant or having a kid or, you know, and so there's practical things. So my mentors in my professional life often were people who looked like me. And now my mentor at a national level are people who are in positions of authority, who are now bringing me up with them. And they don't necessarily look like me, but they're people who appreciate and value what I can bring to the table. So I see them as your champions. And at your age, they should be people who champion the real you. Not necessarily the star version of you that you put out to the world. That's of value. But it's the people who value you for the things that maybe not everybody knows. The people who see that you have this love of Shakespeare that's just so odd. Why would you, you know, so those are the people that are your champions.
Right. I was struck by one of your early comments about quitting, and that you were, when you realized something wasn't working, quitting, and you ended up pivoting and changed course. I was interested because there's, I think, a lot to be said for quitting and quitting sooner rather than later, and not wasting one's time and energy and resources once one realizes that there's a better course. And I was wondering if you had either an experience or something you could share with us, or thoughts on the principle of quitting.
Yeah, so there is there's a champion poker player, and I'm blanking on her name, but she writes a wonderful book on quitting. Who plays poker? Okay, there's more poker players than pre-metters. Okay, that says something. Good. Poker is an analogy for life. I just learned to play poker in my 20s. I was not like you guys. I just learned. And one of the key things about poker is you got to know when to hold them. You got to know when to fold them. Kenny Rogers, anyone?
Yeah, there we go.
So that's a very lovely, applicable theme for life. There's a time when you keep going on something. You persevere. Grit, as many of you have called it and heard it referred to. But there is a time also where you're doing the same thing and nothing's progressing and the joy is slowly slipping. That purpose of why you're doing this in this first place is starting to get hazier and hazier. So come back to that purpose. Is what you're doing for the right purpose still there? Or is it still creating some sense of fulfillment in you? If it's not, and you're just checking boxes, that's a sign that maybe you need to quit. If you have champions and mentors, those are the times when you talk to those people and say, look, you know me well. Is this part of my purpose? Is this part of my journey? Do I expect this to be this hard? They'll be honest with you. But then you sit with yourself a little bit. And I pivoted, seemingly not a big deal if you look at it externally, but within the field of medicine, it's a long route. It's many, many years of training. And so if you change a subject in the middle of it, it's an additional many years. And I completely changed my scientific field from one to something that was completely unrelated. And it required additional years of training in the lab. And, you know, you're not making any money when you're training in research, by the way. So there's practical considerations. And so those are big decisions. Those are adulting 101 decisions. And so I had to ask some people, and including my spouse, because at that time it involved him too. And, we really thought about it. And I said, if I'm not getting any purpose in this line of research, in this line of my career, why am I doing it? I'm just doing it to fulfill a criteria because that's what a good academic does. I mean, I'm just checking a box. And so it was a tough decision. It was risky. I was throwing away years of training. But I pivoted, and there was a sense of freedom about that, honestly, and I had no problem finding a mentor and jumping in. Because once you're free and you're doing your actual purpose, quitting can be a release and a creative energy that comes to you that's just completely clarifying. So for me, it was a blessing, but it was scary. It was one of the scariest things I'd done because it was putting a lot of what I had done, work towards, at risk. I was kind of throwing away my entire research career at that time. And I was not young. So.
And is it Annie Duke's? Annie Duke's book?
That's it,
Yeah,
Annie
so,
Duke.
so Annie
Annie
Duke,
Duke.
Annie Duke is the professional poker player that wrote the book on quitting. It just came to
Yeah, read it. It's a great book.
A great book.
It's a great book.
I would love to, if you're up to taking some questions from the students, open it up right now to questions from the audience. Anyone have a question? Want to follow up on?
Yeah,
Please.
go ahead.
More about like balancing your professional life with your kids and stuff, and just like maintaining your relations with your family, but then also your coworkers.
Yeah, thanks. So the question was about balancing professional life and kids and collegial relationships with my colleagues. Yeah, great question. So increasingly, I think more and more people are having to do this not alone, okay? So I have a partner in parenting who is an equal partner. And so, you know, we were able to balance a lot of that from the get-go. I met my husband in college, so he knew that I was aiming to be a physician. So that helped. He knew what training was gonna be like. You know, we both went through training together. It was long hours, and so when I did give birth to our first child, he realized that it was gonna take an unduly toll on me, physically and professionally. I was gonna be delayed. So then he stepped up. You know, after our eldest was in school, he started, you know, to do more of those things. And so it's been an equal partnership. So the very honest short answer is I have a great co-parent. And I have a very supportive family. I'm extremely privileged. I have, you know, the ability, we have a nanny, you know, I am very lucky that way. In terms of my colleagues, I was able to then exert some of that understanding and my own privilege to my colleagues who may not have that privilege, to some of my colleagues who are single parents, to my colleagues who don't have the ability to have financial and familial support. So I've learned that obviously in my own space of privilege that I need to pay that forward and extend that understanding and provide advice and support when desired. It's not always desired, but if they ask for it, then provide that perspective on how to balance that. We take turns. When the kids were younger, part of being an academic is going to national meetings and getting your face out there. My husband did a lot more of that when the kids were younger because I was more of the child rearing. I mean, they were really small, and my career allowed me to do that. Now, I'm doing more of the national exposing, although he hasn't given up traveling. He loves traveling, I will say. But it's a bit of a balance. And I have to give my partner credit for that too, and I support him too. I mean, I think he would equally say the same thing about me. So.
Right. Yeah.
You keep mentioning like purpose, like
Yeah.
how do you know like what is like a good purpose versus like a purpose like not purpose?
What's a good purpose? Okay. So this is where it's hard to know, okay? And it's hard for people of a certain age to know, even older, right? So this is when you sit quietly with yourself, and this is hard in this day and age, with a lot of distractions, okay? But I'm gonna get a little bit zen here. You have to sit quietly with that question once in a while. It's when you're really true to yourself, when you're doing something and you're in that thing where you're really at peace with what you're doing. It could be scooching a field hockey ball. It could be that. There is a time in your life when you're really real with yourself. It could be on stage. I don't know. I mean, there's a time when you know you're real. And that's in those quiet times you think, what do I like to do? What is it that gives me that feeling? And for many of us, it's as simple as I like to make people around me happy. It could be as simple as that. I love the feeling of making my friends happy. I love doing nice things for my friends. I love that feeling I get when I do really well on an analytical paper and my teacher is like, that's amazing. I love that feeling. I like to think. I like to think through hard questions. For our debaters, that high you get after winning an argument. That's what I mean by purpose. It doesn't have to be a specific, like I'm going to be a cardiovascular surgeon. No, but I love fixing things that are really hard. It gives me a high. I love that. I love answering hard questions that nobody else does. My ego gets a rise out of that. Or I love the feeling I get when the person next to me, I can make them smile after having a really, really awful day. Like, I'm good at that. I'm good at making this person smile. I'm good at making people laugh. It's in those quiet moments that you get your purpose. I love that you don't have cell phones at school anymore, even though it may be a provocative and controversial thing. But you have that time to be quiet. And that's why. It's good for all of us. It's good for any of us to sit with our purpose once in a while. But great question. Great question.
Yeah.
How did you choose instruction team? You kind of always know what you were going to.
So nerdy answer, really, truly. So again, speaking to purpose, I was in my second year of residency. So after medical school, everybody goes through a residency in the specific field you want to go into. So I was a general internist, which is kind of the whole body. So a general doctor, and we go through residency. And as part of that, you're rounding and rotating in the ICU. You do that for a month at a time. So I'm in the ICU. It's call every third night. It's kind of tough. It's intense. And a young woman came, and she had a very complicated disease. And she had lupus, and she had all these complications, and she had this disease called pulmonary hypertension. And I remember everybody was scared by it. And they said, oh, wait, we need to call the specialist. And the specialist came in and started explaining to me what this disease is. And it's the perfect mix of cardiovascular and lung disease. And I just fell in love with physiology. I liked knowing how things worked. And so the ICU and pulmonary vascular disease and cardiovascular disease is about how things work in the body. And so it was a natural fit for me. But I didn't choose that till pretty late in the game. I mean, I didn't go into medical school knowing that that's what I wanted to do. So,
Yeah.
So like, what are your hours like? I'm sure it's like crazy. Do you have to be like constantly on call and stuff like that, or is it like?
it's a good question. So when I'm on service, and I'm not on service all the time, right? So I just came off service. So it was really busy in the ICU. Sunvi didn't see me a lot. I was on 7 to 7. And I loved it, and I was really busy. But then this week, I'm on academic time, so I have a lot of downtime. I have time with my research team. I make my own hours. As long as the work gets done, I have more flexibility. So for me, as an academic, I have a lot of flexibility in my time. I have to be responsible and not procrastinate because it's, but when I'm on service, it's busy. Yeah.
Got a question up here.
During COVID, did you have to take a break from all of your researching and academic side of MD, or did you like to spend all the time in ICU with patients, or were you able to do some research as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was doing a lot more clinical medicine. I was spending a lot more time in the ICU. One, because that's where we were needed. All of us were needed in the ICU. So all healthcare providers, if you weren't in the ICU, you may remember, like, there was a joke, like, ophthalmologists were getting called into the ICU to, like, run the vent. It was kind of funny because we just needed more people in the So I was doing more ICU than I usually would do. However, again, this is one of those blessings that came out of COVID. The Texas Medical Center and the VA was one of the sites of the national COVID studies that came through. Operation Warp Speed was funded by the federal government. And the Trump administration at that time sent a lot of money that combined private pharmaceutical industries and public funding. It was one of the best mixes I've ever seen that advanced science. I've never seen science advance at such a pace. Usually everybody's competing against each other, but everybody was there in a cohesive unit. And so I and my colleague were picked to lead the COVID trials at the VA. So a lot of the patients I was taking care of when I was off service, my team was also talking to them and their families if they'd like to participate in the trials for all the therapies. So I got to do that research and utilize my research expertise, but it was in a different field than I normally do, like today.
Yeah.
You mentioned how serving during COVID was like a privilege. Could you talk a little bit more about like how you were able to find colleges from that side?
Yeah, that's and I can now. So kind of like what your friend was asking, my research career and my research team gained a lot of knowledge in terms of working with public and private funding, how to harness private funding, not just public funding, how to start and conduct a huge trial, clinical trial. You network and you make really good contacts across the country when you're like the Houston VA's lead researcher, right? My colleague who put me forward is the head of clinical operations and research at the VA. You know, she's an amazing person. So, I mean, one of the biggest blessings was that in my professional life. And then also just getting to see a side of my team, the nurses who I'd known for 2 decades, seeing their bravery, seeing the things that they did for people. I won't ever forget that side of them. You know, even in days when, you know, we're not seeing eye to eye day to day on certain things, I'll always think back that, you know, I saw the best of them during that time. So you see your colleagues in a different light. You have a lot of regard for them.
Any other questions? We've got time for a couple more. I'd be interested while I'll give you time to think a little bit. You talked about public and private funding and your role being on the government side with your job, but also interacting with, I think, private institutions as well. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I think that's something entirely new for us to be thinking about, and just how that works in the research area.
So, and I think this is something worth considering for your futures, because I didn't really think about this. You can, so traditionally, there's a pot of money, right? And the federal government will have an access to a certain pot of money. Congress decides and then distributes it as a budget every year. And some of that money is research oriented, some of that is research and development, some of that is technological. It may fall under defense, but not always. It's separate R&D. Some of it's VHA designated, Veteran Healthcare Administration. So there's a huge pile of money there. And anybody can apply through a grant to receive X amount of money. And there's certain criteria you satisfy. There's certain times of the year. It can be $100,000. It can be $3.1 million. It can be for 1 year. It can be for 5 years. It's usually distributed through the National Institutes of Health or the Department of Defense to your institution. So you as an individual don't get that money. Your institution gets that money, the Office of Research, and then they help you distribute it. But it's yours. It belongs to you. That's fine. That's a very competitive process. It's usually not equitable. It's very challenging. Not anybody off the street can do it, even if you have a great idea. You have to be part of an entrenched institution. You know, coming from Baylor helps. Institutions that don't have a history of research, they're at a disadvantage because they don't have the infrastructure. Private is more equitable. They still want you to satisfy certain competitive criteria, but you know, Merck Pharmaceuticals is going to give an investigator, a small investigator who's at a smaller university but has a great idea, Merck is going to be more willing to invest in that one investigator. So you can get a start in research or any great idea, whether it's business, venture capitalists, you can get a great idea off the ground with a private company than the federal government. The federal government is going to want you to show some clout, right? You're going to need some background. But for newbies who are young and hungry, you don't have any clout. And unless you have a mentor who has some authority and power, how are you going to get up there? So private industries have a history in this country, whether it's venture capitalism or private pharmaceutical industries, of supporting the underdogs, supporting the small investigators, the startups, the entrepreneurs. So if you want money, you got to go there first. And for those of you who have a business background, you know this far better than me. What I learned through COVID is if there's a need, if there's an urgency, private and public can work together. Private and federal can work together. And so now there's a whole field of jobs, and my niece and nephew do this. They work with private companies that help negotiate contracts with the federal government. And so what they did is during college, they did internships with the federal government, with the Department of Energy, with the Department of Defense, with the Department of State. They're not working for government. Their jobs in the private sector now are companies that like the fact that these young people had learned how government works. And so they hired them to liaison. And so that's a really neat field. You can be working for a private company, but have an understanding of the way government contracts work, the way a bill gets passed, the people's names on these committees. It's not a field that necessarily people think about, but you're very sought after if you've had any sort of exposure to the government. And that's not just federal, but state as well. So if you can, utilize some of those internships, not just through the private firms in college, but if there's a government position, go for it. Because that's highly sought after now on the private side. And I don't think it's just healthcare and STEM.
We'll bring it all the way around where we started, back at Kinkaid, and your writing classes, that you clearly got very good at writing, because the key is being able to communicate in the application process by writing the grants to get that money.
Yeah.
And and it's something that students that are in STEM classes may not realize, that, oh my goodness, it actually, writing that history paper, doing the research, writing a rhetorical paper in English, that actually has real value on down the road when I'm putting a grant proposal together.
Absolutely. And part of being, adept at grantsmanship, that's the actual word, yeah, is not just selling your story and your hypothesis and why you're eminently qualified with your team to do something, but also presenting the opposite side. Well, what if we have these results that completely oppose what we're predicting it's going to show? Well, this is my plan for that. So you really have to analyze both sides. That, counter position is very important. So I never thought I'd have to develop those lawyer skills, but you do. You have to be able to analyze both sides as well.
That's great. Thank you so much. It's been
you.
just delightful spending the afternoon with you.